All right, what's up, everybody? Dr. Jeff Moore here, currently serving as the CEO of ICE. Thrilled to have you on another PT on ICE episode. Not a Thursday. I'm usually on here on Thursday. Good to join you on a clinical Tuesday as opposed to a leadership Thursday. As far as what's up, going on for courses, got a handful of live courses coming up this weekend. I'll be down in Orlando, Florida. At doing cervical spine management. I know Dunaway is going to be out in Denver or here in Denver doing total spine thrust. And I believe Jordan Berry is going to be down in Amarillo, Texas doing lumbar spine management. As far as online courses, Rehab of the Injured Runner starts today. I'm not sure if they sold out or if there's still seats available. You might be able to jump on that. So if you want to jump into Rehab of the Injured Runner, that might be an opportunity still if you jump in sometime early this morning. Hope everybody's well. I don't have a gut check to tell you about because it's not Thursday, so I can dive right in. So what I want to talk about today is healthy behaviors being a tough drug to sell. So we talk a lot about exercise as medicine. We've talked a lot about, for those of you who heard Tim Flynn's incredible John H.P. Maley lecture at the APTA Centennial, talking about take your meds, right? So mindfulness and education and diet and sleep. We know these drugs, if you will, these lifestyle behavior modifications are massively potent and valuable. But boy, they're tough to sell. And this comes up all the time in our courses because we're always talking about PT version 2.0 is about changing lives, not back pain or neck pain. And doing that gets into lifestyle behavior modification. Many of you have seen this whole deal, right, in our spine courses. That concept is at the very core of this issue. If we can get people to actually change in a substantial way their lifestyle behaviors, the way they sleep, the way they fuel, right? What they put in their mouths, how much stress they have. If we are able to get them doing some mindfulness or meditation or deep breathing, we are going to shift things in a more substantial foundational direction than anything that we're going to be able to do with our hands or with our needles or with our cups or even with our cueing. I mean, these things are going to change the entire system as opposed to one local area. But yes, while they're a bigger lever, they are a harder sell. Behavior modification is tough. And this always comes up in our courses. And people often ask, how do you go about it? So I just want to give a few tips as we're all kind of new to this space over the past couple of years. We certainly have some failures and successes to begin gathering data to realize what works and what doesn't. And let me lay out a few of those. So first of all, on the first visit, break the ice but not the relationship. Break the ice, but not the relationship. What I mean by that is make sure that you have these healthy living behavior data inquiries on your intake form. So when they're filling out their paperwork, they're being asked about their sleep and their diet and whether or not they're doing any sort of mindfulness work in their life and what their level of current physical activity or exercise is. So they're being asked about this stuff. Thus, you're surprising them because oftentimes going to PT, if they have anterior hip pain, they were not expecting to talk about whether or not they have a mindfulness practice, how well they're sleeping, how they're fueling. They weren't ready for that conversation. That's fine, right? You want to take down that barrier so that you surprise them during the paperwork, but you don't want to sell in a surprised environment. So that's why we say break the ice, but not the relationship. In that first visit, you want to get them realizing those things are going to be a point of conversation, but don't try and sell them on that day because they're caught off guard by that. They weren't ready for that, and selling in a surprised environment is generally not successful or fertile ground. So go ahead and break the ice on it, get them realizing it's going to be something you might address, but don't then also actually try to address it on day one. Do the things they were expecting, but surprise them with the data so they're aware going down the road, it might show up, but you're going to be able to actually sell this stuff once they're already warm to the idea that it's going to be a part of the process. So on day one, break the ice, but not the relationship. And do that by getting the data on the intake forms, but don't actually bring it up as a conversation when you're sitting with that person, and certainly don't try to sell that that is the underlying or causative factor for their problem while you're still establishing rapport and doing things that they were expecting or a little bit more in line with that expectation. All right, when they come back and hopefully you've done things to that local region, whether it's their hip or their shoulder or their neck or their back, that made them say, boy, I think I'm moving in the right direction. Like when I was here last time, it was already feeling a bit better. I've done some of the things you gave me. I'm doing even better. So we've done some things locally and likely mechanically to that region to begin to build their confidence, build their relationship, build their expectation. And we've already broken down the barrier of surprise about lifestyle behavior. Now this is becoming more of a sellable scenario. Here's the key on visit 2 or visit 3. It really depends on how well you're doing forming the relationship with this patient. This is where you need to begin to suggest a link between healthy behaviors and this recurring or this relevant mechanical complaint. What is so critical is that your subjective timelines for when their back pain or shoulder pain or hip pain came on that you got during day 1, you can now begin to maybe suggest a parallel between that and their healthy behavior guidelines. So here's how this shakes out. So visit 2, when they come in and you reassess and you sell a bit and they're like, gosh, doc, this is good. I'm going in the right direction. Now is the time to say, before we jump in, can we unpack a little bit? You had mentioned that sleep, you're only getting about 5 hours, right? I want to chat a little bit about your overall ecosystem here before we jump in. Has that always been that way? Like, have you always only gotten 5 hours? Was that more recent? Can you tell me a bit about your sleep? Now you begin to unpack the timeline of their behaviors. And here's the hope, right? Here's the beauty of it when it works out. They will begin to realize that when they began to fuel improperly, when they began to sleep poorly, sounds a whole lot like when they told you their back pain or their shoulder pain or their hip pain came on last session. Meaning on the first visit, you did a really good job clarifying timeline. When exactly did your back pain start? Or if it's recurrent, when does it tend to come on? What about your shoulder, your hip, etc.? Now you're doing the same thing with lifestyle behaviors. When did those behaviors change? Right? Do they always change the same time of year? Do you go on shift work at the same time? Tell me about those behaviors. If those 2 timelines match up, it is quite common where that patient will say, you know, it's funny, when I was here on Monday, I was telling you my back pain started in February, and that was the same time that I went on shift work and my sleep really got disrupted. That is a golden moment. If you can get the patient to identify that there is symmetry between their onset of symptoms and their onset of healthy behavior change, lifestyle change, that's when the light bulb goes off. And that's when the patient says, you know, doc, a lot of the things you're asking me today changed the same time my symptoms started that I told you about on Monday. Maybe those lifestyle behaviors have relevance in my symptoms. That is the moment you're going for. That is the motivational interviewing summit, right? When the person says, oh my gosh, these things are connected. You didn't say, hey, look, these things are connected. You simply made the timeline of each of them so clear that the patient was able to say, boy, those sound similar. I wonder if they're connected. It will forever be more valuable if the patient comes to the conclusion on their own, in particular when it comes to behavior change. Things that are habits that are really hard to get out of ruts. If the person can come up with the idea, they have so much more emotional equity and power driving their willingness to change. Draw those timelines close to one another and suggest, hopefully they just say it, but what you might need to say is, okay, that sounds a bit like the timeline on Monday. Do you feel like these 2 things are happening together? And then just leave that there and let them spin their wheels. And if you can suggest these things, if they can say it on their own accord, if they can come to the conclusion, now we are off to the races. Okay, whether that happens on visit 2 or visit 3, that generally is the way to do it. Now, once you're there, once you and the patient both say, there's a relationship here between the way that I'm living and the choices that I'm making and these symptoms that keep recurring. Okay, now we're rolling. Do less better. This is the next part of the process, right? Here's what I encourage you to do. It is very rare that people have not tried to live better. It's very rare that people have not tried to improve their sleep, have not went on a diet, have not done the kind of things that are usually their understanding will lead to an overall better quality of life. It's very rare that people haven't tried, but people have usually tried too much. What I mean by that is they've tried too many things at once. So once you've hit this point where you and the patient both agree that the way they're living is relevant for their symptoms, what is really important is to validate why it didn't work before. People's biggest obstacle to making lifestyle behavior change is them saying, Doc, I've tried to quit smoking. I've tried, and they will give you this story about, I've tried so hard in the past and it never works. That is not an environment where someone's ready to try again or thinks they have optimism surrounding their ability to be successful. The most important thing at this stage is to validate why it didn't work before. So what I'll usually say is, tell me about that effort, right? So now that we realize these things might be related, it sounds like you've tried to sleep better. Can you tell me about it? And they will usually give you a list. Well, I tried to meditate and I went to bed at the same time and right? I immediately say, well, I know I would never have been able to make all those changes at once for any period of time that would have actually allowed them to pay off. I never would have been able to cut out all my sugar and stop eating at night and drink more water and eat more protein. It sounds like you tried enough things that it became impossible. That is very validating to these people, right? And it also says to them, the way I did it before isn't the way I'm going to do this now. I love when Justin Dunaway talks about one of the most important things that he says to his patients who have chronic pain and who have tried everything is that what we're about to do is different. And just the fact that it's different is really exciting because what they tried before didn't work. So now what you're saying is, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to go back at this, but we certainly aren't going to go back at it the way you tried it before. And that gives hope, and hope is equity, right? Now we can leverage that hope, we can leverage that motivation to try this new approach. And the new approach is doing less, better, right? So now we're going to say, we want you just to focus on blank, and you've got to commit. You've got to commit, right? Now there's certain evidence guidelines that will suggest where your commitment should be. For example, we all know for sleep hygiene, consistency is probably the biggest lever. More so than dark, right? More so than exercise in the morning, not the night. More so than all the other modifiable behaviors. Consistency seems to make the biggest change the fastest. So there are certain areas. In diet, we always talk about eradicating sugar. We don't have to start there, but added sugar seems to be a big lever. Choose one. Make sure the patient thinks it's a hurdle they can get over, and make sure you do it for long enough to matter. Because those are the things, complexity, duration, that didn't happen the first time that led to their failure. So validate them, right? We know you've tried before. Here's why I think it didn't work. Certainly wouldn't have worked for me. Here's what we're going to do differently this time. Okay, so first of all, break the ice, not the relationship, and don't sell day one. Day two, let timeline symmetry generate the hypothesis that these things are related on behalf of the patient. Once it's generated, validate why what they did before didn't work, why what you're going to do is different, and by different, I mean better, and by better, I mean less. We're going to choose one thing. You did 9 things before. Nobody can do 9 things at the same time for long enough to make a difference. We're going to do one that we know is going to change things. As you get traction, we can talk about diving deeper. Okay, finally, now that we're there, what gets tracked gets changed. So you've got to find a way to make this quantifiable. Things like sleep, obviously a wearable is gold. We know that wearables aren't very good for stages of sleep, REM versus deep versus light, but we know they are good for quantity of sleep. When you went to bed and when you got up, especially if when you wake up, you literally get up. Because they're motion sensitive, if you leave the room, you're going to get a lot better data on the actual quantity of sleep. So for wearables, or for sleep, we've got wearables. For activity, we've got wearables. For nutrition, we've got apps, MyFitnessPal. For mindfulness, we've got so many apps, like 10%, right, that will show you streaks, how many days in a row you've done it, right? So many apps will give you data on your compliance in how many days in a row, so we can actually track whether or not you're doing these things and if they're having an effect. Doc, I think I'm sleeping better has never changed anybody's life. Doc, look at my data. I'm getting so much more sleep. I'm falling asleep faster. I'm awake a lot less. I'm going to the bathroom a lot less. I am observably, quantifiably, drastically affecting the quality and quantity of my sleep. I'm really a believer that things we're doing are making a difference, right? We've got to show that objectively. What gets tracked gets changed. Finally, okay, break the ice, not the relationship. Show the timeline symmetry. Validate and do less better. Track it objectively. That's the recipe if we're really going to make lifestyle behavior change. We've said it a million times, but the last thing is you've got to be doing it. If you're the one selling it, you've got to be doing it. Not only because it's very inspiring and people say, I want to have your energy, or I wish I had those metrics, or all the things that make somebody want to follow your lead and your advice, but you can also answer all the questions. When somebody says, well, how do you deal with blank? If you're actually doing it, you can say, well, here's what works for me. And it feels like a teamwork. It feels like you're in this together. It feels like they have a co-pilot. You've got to be doing it if you want them to change it. There's no exceptions to this. Nobody quits smoking talking to the doctor who smokes. Nobody does that. If you can't be about it, you shouldn't talk about it. So make sure you've got that dialed in first. Then follow that recipe. Let me know if you have any questions. We've got to break this open because we know that changing lives, not back pain, revolves around healthy behavior, healthy living, and healthy behavior modification. That recipe of do not sell during surprise, that never works. So break the ice, but not the relationship. Making the timeline so clear that the patient can say, boy, as I'm telling you this, it sounds a lot like what I told you on Monday. Motivational interviewing one-on-one. Let them draw the conclusion. Number 3, validate. We know you've tried before. And the way you did it wouldn't have worked for me either. Let's try a very different approach, a simpler approach, one that I think is going to be successful. And finally, track it. If you can put those things together, you'll go from saying, team, I love the idea, but it's so hard to get people to change. This sequence of events is going to get you there. Try it and let me know how it goes. There are a few things I'm more excited about than getting us all better at legitimately changing lifestyle behavior. So if you have feedback on how this works, I want to hear about it. Team, have an awesome Tuesday. Get in clinic, change some lives, not just back pain. Cheers, everybody.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.